Hello and welcome to my channel. In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to manipulate and save, read data from CSV files and how to store these data into a database server like Postgres using Deno. In case you don't know, CSV data is a comma separated data. It's a very common file format for data transfer, and it is very used in business applications. So it looks like that. The first row contains the header or the names of the columns, and the rest is actually a comma separated data, the actual data. So in this case we have 7 columns. The first one is ID, first name, last name, gender, age, email, phone, and the corresponding data is this. This is the ID, this is the first name, the last name, the gender, the age, the email, and the phone. So, and I'm going to show you how to do this with Deno. So we are going to use third-party modules. So if you go to Deno land and then you go to third-party modules and you search for CSV, we are going to use this CSV module here. So it's very easy to use. And other than that, we are going to use also the PG driver client for Postgres. There are other driver connectors for other database systems. So if your database flavor is something else, please feel free to find your client. So we are going to use these two modules. For manipulating the database itself, we are going to use either dbeaver. I'm going to use dbeaver. It's a universal database tool where you can connect to many different database systems. Or you can, if you're going to use Postgres, you can use pgadmin. This is also a good alternative. Actually, I'm not going to use dbeaver. I'm going to use something else. I'm going to use SQL tool, which is an extension for VS Code. If you go to extensions here and you type SQL, so you will see SQL tools. Here is the second after SQL server. So this is also a universal connector to database systems. You can actually connect to various database systems from here. It's directly from VS Code. You can connect to Postgres, SQLite, MySQL, etc. Other than that, I'm going also to use, I'm going to also use the Deno official plugin. If you don't have that, go ahead and install that. When you are going to create your project in Deno, you will have to create a settings file, and this is actually will be done with the assistance of the Deno plugin. So if you install the plugin for Deno and go read the information here and copy the data that you need and place that in your settings JSON inside your project. This will be very helpful for you. Okay, so other than that, I'm starting with an empty project. I have only the mock data here, and I have the settings, and that's it. The application will look like that. If you take a look at the data here, you see that we are going to be dealing with a person of some kind. So a person will be having an ID, a first name, last name, a gender, age, email, phone. So for this the type of applications, we are going to create, first off, we are going to create a main file. This will be calling the all other files. And from here we are going to import, we are going to import, for example, the person data structure or class, if you will, and I'm going to put that inside a folder called source interface. Oh, actually not interfaces, it's directly class. So it's a person TS. Now this file doesn't exist yet, and I'm going to create it in just a moment, actually right away. So I have these sources, this source directory, and I'm going to create a new file here, and I'm going to call that person ts. TS means it's a TypeScript file. We are going to write our code in TypeScript directly. Thank goodness, because I don't like JavaScript. It has a lot of trouble. And TypeScript actually enables you to understand what types are your data actually are going to be. So for example, if you say, for example, a function takes a parameter of, I don't know, some data. Okay, you don't know actually if that data is a string, a number, or a person, for example, or an array of some sort in JavaScript. But in TypeScript, you are forced to declare the type of the data. And that prevents you from doing a lot of errors while developing your project. So for our case here, I'm going to declare a class, and I'm going to call that class person. And actually that class will be just mirroring the data structure that we are going, the data actually, not the data structure. The person is the data structure, and the data is the mock data that we have. So I'm going to call it person. And in person, I'm going to declare an ID, which is a string. I'm going to declare a first name, which will be also a string. You see, I'm telling the compiler, I'm telling TypeScript that that the type of my data is a string. So in the future, if I make a mistake, the compiler will tell me that I've done a mistake at that point, and that will prevent me from wasting a lot of time chasing the bugs in my code. So we will be having last name, and that will be also a string. We will be having a gender, and that will be of type gender, and that type will be defined in a bit, in a different place. Email will be a string. Phone will be also a string. Why not a number? Because some phone numbers have certain format, like for example plus, I don't know, +1, some numbers 546. Okay, and you see that I already have parentheses there, 456 dash, I don't know, 7675 something 9999000. So you see I have string literals here. That's why it's better to define the phone numbers in your applications as strings and not as numbers. Okay, so I have the types, the internal numbers defined. Now I need to define a constructor, and that constructor will actually take all those numbers, all those variables. So ID, string, first name, string, last name, string, and what else? Gender is of type gender, and email of type string. Oh, I've missed age. So age is number, of course. It's not a string in this case, but it will be transformed to a string later in the application, because storing this in the database is better as a text. Well, we will see. So gender, age is a number, email is a string, phone is a string. Okay, so that's the constructor, and I'm going to tell the class that my internal variable ID equals to this parameter ID, and this first name equals first name, this last name equals last name, this what gender equals gender, this age equals age, this email equals email, and this phone equals phone. Right, so 1 2 3 4 5 7, we have that. Okay, and we need to create another file here, and I'm going to call that interfaces.ts. Alright, here I'm going to declare an interface called gender, and that interface will have actually an enum, and that will be actually it's not an enum, it's just one of or two values. So this will be a type, actually it's not even an interface, it's a type. So okay, so here is the thing. This type has one or of two values. It's either a male or a female. This is called a literal type. So you can define a type that consists of constants, and you can say it's kind of discrete type. Okay, so means that it's not continuous. It's not like the set of real numbers, for example. It's a continuous set, right? So you can have 0 0 1 0 0 1 1 1 1, etc. And these are all continuously lying one beside the other. But here this is a discrete type, which means it has only one of two values. It's either male or female. And I'm going to actually export this type. Okay, and I'm going to import gender from interfaces.ts. Okay. When you program in Deno, you need to tell the system that the type of the file that you are importing. It's not explicit. It's not implicit like in node.js. If you have experience with that, here you need to tell that you are importing a TypeScript file. So we have imported gender, and here we see that it is recognized here. So we don't have a red line below that. And we are going to export this class so we can use it in other files, and we are going to export that as the default one. So this is the default name. Okay, so now we have a representation of the data that we have here at the mock in the mock file. Okay, so that person file, that person data structure, that class represents actually the data type in the mock data. So what we need to do now is to, let me check. Yeah. Okay. Now we are going to start implementing the database functionality. So first here, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to name that db TypeScript. Okay. So if you are going to use the PG module from Deno, then this guy, let me show you. This thing relies on both either importing a client or a pool of clients. Usually, if you are going to use only one connection and only one SQL query, then it's sufficient to use the client itself. But I'm going to show you how to use the pool, so in case you have many operations on the database side, then you know how to use that. So I'm going to import the pool, and that's going to be from https deno.land, and x means the third-party modules, and we are going to get the PG module at it will be at version actually 050, and we are going to import the mod file ts. It has exported all the main data types from there. So we are importing the pool, and now we are going to import the person class, and the person class is imported from, as we've seen previously, it's from person ts. Okay. Now, other than that, we are going to import something we call a connection string or a connection options. I'm going to do it right now. Import connection, and it's going to be from from the interfaces. It's not there yet at this point, and we are going to define it right away. So if I go to the interfaces, so in the interfaces I just okay, what's the connection? The connection is an option, is an object of settings that you send to the database system, based on which your database system opens a connection for you or not. So I'm going to say this. It's going to be an interface, and this interface is going to have inside, this interface will be called, of course, connection, and it's going to have the user, which is the username, which is string. It will be having the host name, which is also a string. It will be having the database that you are going to connect to. We are talking about Postgres here. So this is a string, and of course the password, which is a string as well, and the port of your database server, and that will be a number. Be careful here, because if you make the mistake and define the port as a string, most probably you will have problems connecting to the database, and it won't be obvious why. Okay, so I by accident I've put that as a string, and it took me a lot of time to figure out what's happening. So the port must be a number. Okay, so now we are exporting the interface connection that will contain the optional data for connecting to the database. So okay, right, now here is what we are going to do. We are going to define a class, and that class will be responsible for database services. Okay, usually if you have an application and that application deals with a database system, then you try to make only one class that is responsible for database work. So you don't connect to your database from different places, only through that interface that you create. So here we are going to do DB, I'm going to call it originally DB services, and that class will be having a connection options. Remember that connection options is of type connection, which we already defined. It will be having an internal variable of pool, and that will be also of type pool, and that type comes from the PG module. Connection comes from the interface that we have defined here. Okay, and we define a constructor because every class must have a constructor. The constructor will take a configuration file and will parse that configuration file to extract the configuration from inside and populate the pool information, the connection information, etc. So config file, and that is of type string. Okay, now we need a config variable that will contain the configuration, the final configuration, and that will be we will be parsing an object, and that object will be coming from read text file sync. We will be using reading files facility offered by Deno, and you can read JSON files directly like that. So config file. Of course, I'm assuming that you are going to read a JSON file and nothing else, because we are not handling the error in other cases. So okay, so now we have the config, which is a JSON object, and we are going to say this connection options equals, now oops, curly braces, yeah. So I'm going now to populate the configuration of the database system, which means I'm going to say config user. Remember, we got the config from the JSON file. Actually, let's create a config JSON right now. So I'm going to create a folder. I'm going to call that folder config. Usually when you create an application, you place your configuration in one folder, so you don't let them like lying here around. So you create a specific folder for configuration, and inside that configuration we are going to create a file called db-config.json. Okay, and in that db-config I'm going to create a JSON object. Here, no, not schema, host name is going to be 127.0.0.1. This is your local host address, and or if you have a database server that is somewhere on the internet or on a local network, you can place the IP address of that address. But since in my case I'm using only the database system on my local host, so I'm providing only the IP address of my local host system. So port, and remember, port is a number. So in this case, it's 5432. This is the default address of your Postgres system. If you are running an instance of Postgres inside a Docker container, then you will have to provide the port number of that container that accepts connections for Postgres. Now we are having also the username, and the username in my case will be tester, and the password is going to be testing123, very original, very safe. And the database is going to be in my case tutorials db. All right, yeah, looks fine. Okay, so back to my db system, to my db file. So I'm going to populate the connection options. In that case, we have parsed that file, the config file, which is the db config JSON. That will be passed from outside, from main TS. And after parsing that file, all that data here will be in config, in the variable config. So I'm going now to assign the values to the connection options. So we have this is kind of safer than to, I don't know, to show your password in a text file or something. You can also place this file in environment variables of some sort, so you don't have to save your or store your password in a text file. But for the sake of this tutorial, that is enough. All right, so we have user, we need host name, that's a property, and we get that from config hostname, and also database comes from config database, password comes from config password, and port comes from config port. Okay. Okay, so now we need to tell the pool, so this pool, that you can connect to the database using the pool instantiation, and provide the pool the connection options. Okay, that should be enough to connect to the database. Now I'm going to set up the database itself, which means I'm going to do setup db, and I'm going to declare that function in a bit. So setup db should do something like if you are connecting to the database for the first time, then setup db is actually setting up your database, removing any unused or useless tables, any data structures that you have defined previously, and you want to start anew. Okay, so you want to refresh your database system with fresh data or something like that. So in this case, I'm going to declare a function, and I'm going to say setup db, which is an async function that takes nothing and is going to actually do just what I have said. It's going to start up the database with fresh data. So in case we have errors, so okay, I will place the code in a try catch, which is usually how things are done. In case you have some errors, you display the errors. So console error. Okay. So here is what you're going to do. You're going to say you're going to await, because the operation, when you are executing some queries on the pool, that operation is asynchronous. In that case, it will return you a promise. So in that case, you can call await to wait for the operation to finish and to receive the actual data, if in case you have some data, if you are expecting some data. In our case, we are not expecting any exact data in return. We are just going to create some types and a table. So I'm going to say pool, and here is the query operation that you can use on the pool instance. You can talk to the database from this using this. Okay, so in that case, I'm going to say create type, and that type will be called gender, because we have only two values. If you go to the interfaces and look down, we have only two values, a male or a female, and that data type is called gender, but we don't have a type gender on the database. We need to define that. So create type gender, the gent, as enumeration. Enumeration is defined on Postgres, so you can now provide the values of that enumeration, which is male or female. Okay, and that should be fine. This operation will execute this query, and it will await until you finish. It will await until that operation finish. Okay. The next thing is something similar. Okay, now we have the gender created. We can create the table that will be depending on that type. So we are doing exactly the same thing. Pool query. And now we can declare the operation. If you know SQL, then you know that tables are created like this. Create table, the name of tables, I'm going to call it persons, and you open a parenthesis, and in that parenthesis, in those parentheses, you declare the data, the column names, and I have an ID, and that ID is of type text, and it is a primary key. Okay. I have also first name, so first name is also text. Of course, you can say that it's a text of 10 symbols or 15 symbols or whatever. For simplicity, I'm leaving this as is. And it must not be null, so it must not be empty. Okay, last name is also a text. It's not null. Gender. And this is the type that I have defined. That is gent, and it's not null. Age is integer, and also it's not null. Email is a text and is not null, because everybody nowadays have an email address. And phone is also a text and also is not a null. Okay. So we have created the setup DB. Okay, that looks okay. All right. So I'm executing. Okay. So after connecting to the database, I'm executing, setting up the database itself, the tables. And if this operation is successful, then I'm going to say that console log db setup is okay. Other than that, I'm going to catch any errors, and I'm going to say console error that. Okay, so now we have finished the database setup. What we have left now is inserting the data. That will be a bit long function, but we have to do it anyways. So okay, inserting the data, it looks like this. You are going to receive an array of person data, and you are going to convert each person instance to a text format that the database can understand. And after that, you will make a query, which is insert into table, which is persons, the data that you have acquired. Okay, in case there are any errors, you report the errors. Otherwise, you return life is happy, everything is okay. Okay, and of course, you never forget to release any resources you have opened, because otherwise that would be a memory release, and your application will suffer in later stages. Okay, so okay, let's go and do that. I will be declaring a function, and that will be called insert data, and that function will contain data rows, which, as I said, is of type person array. Okay, so we are going to receive an array of person data. Okay, and it will return a promise with a void, which means I'm not expecting any data back, because this is an insertion. Okay, so I'm going to declare a rows variable, which will be a string, and that string will be for now empty. Okay, so what it's saying, row is declared but its value is never read. Okay, that's fine. This is one of the things the Deno plugin is actually very useful for. I mean, if you declared some variables in your code and you forgot to assign them to something or use them, it will tell you that you have something unused there, so you can get rid of that. What I'm going to do now is that I'm going to create a loop. Let I equals 1, I equals data rows length I plus plus. Why I'm starting at 1 and not from 1 and not from 0? Because the 0th row, or the very first row in the CSV file, is actually the name of the header. So it's the name of the columns. That's why the actual data, well, usually some CSV files don't do that, and you can assign the naming of the columns to your liking, but usually the first row usually contains the name of the columns. So I'm assuming that here. Const the actual person, which means at this moment, and again I'm telling that the variable person is of type person, so in later code I don't get into errors. So data rows I. Okay, so I will be iterating through every row, and I'm going to say const current value, meaning the current string value. Why I'm doing this? Because when you say when you do SQL, you say insert into the name of the table person. Okay, the table is persons actually, and you say the names of the columns, and then you say values. Okay, and you have also a parenthesis and values, and this will be produced by the current value. The current value means if you have many values here, then you will define your values like this: one set of parentheses, comma, another set of parentheses, comma, etc. So this means the current value here. Okay, I will keep this here just in case. So the current value is backtick, and I'm going to say what? Parentheses, okay, one apostrophe, one quote, because I'm going to insert now the data inside. I'm using backticks because otherwise it would be very difficult to inject the actual data inside the string. So it will be very tedious and annoying. So this will be very easy to do so. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to show you how it looks like in the final version. So you open a backtick and a closing backtick, and you enclose every value inside single quotes, because this is the data, because strings are enclosed in quotes inside a database. Okay, here is the thing. So I have the ID, the first name, the last name. Be careful here. Some of the names, especially those of Irish origin, maybe Scottish also, contain single quotes inside the naming. Like for example, I don't know, O'Reilly or O'Connor, for example. Okay, so if you put only one quote, you will end up like this. Okay, and the system will report an error. So you need, in that, to avoid this problem, you need to replace any single quote inside the string by double quotes, by two single quotes. Okay, the database system will understand that by presenting two single quotes, not double quotes, two single quotes, the system will replace the two single quotes with one single quote in the end. Okay. What else? We have the gender. The gender is also enclosed with quotes. The age is enclosed with actually I don't need to enclose that in quotes, but I'll leave it. It's not a big problem, I think. Yeah, okay, I will leave it like that. So, all right, never mind. Okay, now after creating this, I'm adding also a comma, because another set of parentheses will be following, and after that I'm going to add this to the rows variable. Okay, and that will create a big insert statement to the database. And after that, I'm going to execute that statement. But there is one problem, and which is the last comma. If your statement is ending with this comma, then this will cause an error. So I need to get rid of that last comma. How is that done? It's simple. It's JavaScript. So if I'm going to test if rows ends with, okay, if it's ending with a comma, okay, then I'm just removing the last row, the last symbol. So rows slice start from 0, rows length -1. Okay, so that's the last symbol in the string. Okay, after that I'm going to declare my SQL statement, and I'm going to say that this is actually insert into table is persons, and I'm going to say the ID, the first name, last name, the gender, the age, the email, and the phone. Okay, and here I'm going to say the values are actually the values are actually the string that we have built here. So I'm going to insert the rows variable, and that should be it. Now actually the database system is, actually the program is prepared to execute this query. So now we are going to grab a client from the pool. So I'm going to say let client is null at this moment. And I'm going to try error. Okay, I'm going to display any error we have, and I'm going to say client, give me a client from the pool. So I'm going to say await this pool, because we have saved the pool of client in our DB services class, and connect. This will return to me a client of pool. Okay, this will return me, since it is an asynchronous operation, it will return a promise, a client of pool wrapped inside a promise. But by using await, we are going to receive the client directly. So await client, and now I'm going to query the SQL statement that I have built. So SQL statement. Okay, so if there is any error, if this executes properly, then I will be inserting the data inside the database, and that's it. That's okay. If there is any error, I will be displaying the errors. Also, I'm going to use finally to release any resources I have acquired. So in that case, if client exists, which means it is defined, which means it acquired memory, then I'm going to release it. that should release back any memory from the system, from the program to the system, to the operating system. So what else? This is, yeah, insertion of the data, set up the data, insert of the data, and now we can do also query the database. Querying the database is actually even simpler. Query, I'm creating a function, I'm going to call it queryDB, and that function will receive an SQL statement of type string, and it's going to return a promise of an array of persons, or it's going to be undefined. Okay, because you might you might receive an empty data set that is undefined, so this is also an option. Your query might be resulting in empty data. Okay, so let rows, which is a person array, equals an empty array at this stage. And I'm going to do what? I'm going to try again. So console error, any error you have. Okay. And here I'm going to say that I'm going to grab another client. Okay. And that client is going to be from this pool. Connect, we have done that before, just a minute before. Okay. Const res results is actually, this is the data structure that contains the result from the database. So it's also a asynchronous operation. So client query and the SQL that we have got, and that result actually rows. Okay, rows is actually a property of the data structure res. So res rows, and we are going to return rows. Okay, so again, finally, I'm going to, actually it's not, okay, oops. Okay. And here, client release. What? Let's client equals, const. Yeah. Yeah, actually true. I need to test that. Even if you are experienced in programming, you still make stupid mistakes always. Okay, so we receive an SQL string. We grab a client from the pool. We execute a query to the database. We receive a set of data. That set might be undefined or not. We grab the rows property of that set, and we return the set, which is an array of person data. In case we have errors, we display the errors, and finally we release any resources we acquired. Okay, so after that we need to export default this class. Okay, so that makes this class actually done. Right, so what is now remaining is the actual job of this tutorial, which means the main file that we almost didn't touch. So we are going to import. We are now going to work with the CSV module. The CSV module has many classes. Let me show you. Okay. The CSV module has a basic read CSV or a where is that? It has, yeah, here. It also has a, yeah, that's why I didn't see it. It has a CSV reader and it has a CSV writer, and it has also basic writing, basic reading and writing functionalities if you don't want to use that. But I'm going to do some. I'm going to actually use the manual reading, this one, because it is detailed. So in case you have to, if you want to set a column separator, or for example how the lines are ending, so you can do that, you can customize that. So I'm going to show you how this is done, but for writing I'm going to use just the simple procedure because it's straightforward. And if you want to do that manually, you can try that yourself. So I'm going to go back to the code and I'm going to import CSV reader and write CSV, and I'm going to import that from the HTTPS Deno land x CSV, and from that I'm going to go to mod.js. Okay. Also, I'm going to import the DB. Oh, actually, it's a default. So DB services class from source. Actually, db.ts. Okay. So I will be also importing gender because I will be needing that to define some data. This is going to be from source, from interfaces. And also we have person, which is good. Now, I'm going to start with reading. First off, I'm going to declare a file that I'm going to read. So const f, this is a handler. F is a file object actually, and it comes from Deno when Deno opens a file. And in this case, I'm going to open this file, the mock data that I have here, and I'm going to tell the system that it's residing in data, mock data.csv, and I'm going to specify options for Deno, which means I'm going to tell that I'm going to only read and not writing. Okay. This is important so you don't do something with the file by mistake. You don't write into the file if you don't want that. I'm going to define the same as I have done with the when I defined the SQL statement, when I defined the parentheses there. I will need an actual row or current row, and that will be a string, an array of string, because this data, each row will be read into an array of strings, and instead of reading the data into a one string separated by a comma, the reader will be reading a array of strings, and it will get rid of the separator itself. So this will be an array of strings. It will be empty for now, and I'm going to read, I'm going to also push the actual row into a set of rows. And this will be a person array, which is also empty at this moment. Now I'm going to define the reader itself. It will be CSV reader, and that reader will, the constructor of CSV reader will take the file type, okay, and some options. Actually, these options are or will be having event handlers as well as some properties. So the event handlers are like this: on cell, in case you will be doing some stuff with the with a certain cell, okay, and on row end, okay. Again, when each row ends, what you are going to do when you are reading this data, when you get to the end of the row, you are going to do something, and we are going to define this as well. So what else? When you end parsing, okay, you will be doing something else, and in case there is an error, okay, you will be receiving that error, and you are going to do something with that error, and in our case, as usual, console error, that error, okay. So okay, so in this case I'm going to say that the column separator is going to be actually the standard comma. The line separator, in our case it will be Unix format, which means the simple end of line. And when we are attempting to save a cell, which will be of type string, then we are going to say row this one, okay, push the cell, okay. We are going to save each cell we are reading from the file, and in that case we are grabbing each part of the string, each part of the line, and we are going to save that into the row variable, into array. When the row ends, I'm going to do this. I'm going to define a person of type big person, okay, and I'm going to say new person, and I'm going to grab that so I don't type everything, okay. I'm going to grab every component of that array, which means every part of that string, it's now residing in an actual array at this moment, array of strings. Okay, I'm going to grab every part of that line, and I'm going to create a person instance from that. Of course, I'm not forgetting to make the gender of type gender, otherwise you will get an error. And I'm not forgetting to parse the age as a number, because otherwise also you will get an error, because inside the data structure, inside the person class, age is a number, not a string. Okay, so other than that, rows, push the actual person. Here I'm building my data set. I'm building the data that I'm going to insert into the database. Okay, so now I'm reading from the file, I'm preparing my data, and then after that I'm going to insert that data into the database. After I read each line, I'm going to make the line empty again. The variable that represents the line empty, because I'm going to read into it again. So I think that's it for this one. Okay, now when I finish reading the whole file, okay, I'm going to actually instantiate the database services class, and I'm going to insert the data inside. There is one thing though that I have noticed, which is the database, instantiating the database or the connection to a database actually takes a bit of time, which means you might not be able to do the operation instantly at the same time. You might be reading the data from the file, but the database itself is not connected yet. So for that case, I'm going to make the system, the program wait a bit, but I will show you how I'm going to do that. So let's start by const db, which is the variable that represents the database, db new db services, and we are going to send the class the place where I'm going to where I have the configuration file stored. So config db config, and that's of type JSON. Okay, right, so now I have I'm in the process of instantiating the database. I'm attempting to connect to the database, but as I said, it might not be instant. So I'm going to set a timeout, and inside that timeout, I'm going to have a function that is going to say this. That function will wait for about 2 seconds. Okay, so yeah, no more. Okay, so that function is going to define the results of the database inserting the data. So insert data, and we have the rows. Okay, so these are the rows that I have defined here up there. Okay, I have prepared the rows here to include all the data from the file, and after that I'm going to insert the data into the database. The function will receive an array of person data, and it will parse that array into a string, into a readable string, and after that it will insert the data into the database. So after that, since this is a since this returns a promise, then I'm going to say result, then, and after that a function, and I'm going to say console log done inserting data into DB. And after that, I'm going to close the file. And now after that, after I have done that, I'm going, after 2 seconds, to query the data and to grab the data from the database and save them into a different file in the data folder. So into a different CSV file, of course. So I'm going to say set timeout. This function will be async, and I'm going to say okay. First, I'm going to inform the user that I'm doing something. Okay, so query. How do you say query? Yeah, querying. Yeah, querying data. Okay, and try again. If you have any error, console error, the error. I'm going to show you what exactly I'm going to construct here. So I will define 2 SQL statements, and I'm going to execute each one so you can see how this works. Okay, so let me check this as well, like this. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to query the database. Remember, we have created a function called queryDB, and that function will receive a SQL statement in a form of string, and it will return the data set or an empty data set. So what we are going to do now is we are going to test whether the data is whether we received anything at all or not. So the data, if it's a valid variable or not, because if it is undefined, then there is nothing to do. We are going to say we are going to define a file name where we are going to save the SCV file, and in that case I'm going to start with the okay. So we are going to execute this statement. So in that case I'm going to say the name of the file will be in the data folder. It's going to be output mails CSV. We are going to check for all males in the data that are of the age less than 18 and over the 65 years, which means all the non-working, I'd say. So I'm going to define a file handler, and that file handler will be again Deno open name and for this one, I'm going to open for writing, which means write is true. I'm going to create it if it doesn't exist, which means create is true. And I'm going to truncate it. Truncate is true. Okay. So after that, I'm going to await save CSV, the file handler, and the data. So CSV is actually it's a function that we need to create, and I'm going to create it in a moment. So CSV, and after that, when we retrieve our data, when we save the data into the file, we tell the system to close the file handler, so we release any resources to the back to the memory. And we say console log query results saved to, and we say the name of the file. Okay, that should be okay. And this guy here is also 2 seconds. Okay. And yeah, one thing, this is actually a definition. Okay, you defined a function or actually an instance of type CSV reader, but you actually need to run it. So this is called what? This is called reader. Okay, so you need to execute that, which means you need to read. Okay, if you call read, it will execute all this code. Okay, so are we finished here? We need to define save CSV. We are going to do it just in a second. I'm just checking. Yeah, I think we are done. So okay, so const save CSV is an async operation and is going to receive a file handler which is of type Deno file, and it will also receive a data set which is of type person array, and that will be actually okay. So const rows, again we are going to define a an array of strings because we need to transform the array of person data into an array of strings. So this is a string, oops, and it is empty at this moment. Now I'm going to define the header of the file, because we are going to save the header name, the column names inside the file. So these are 7 column names, and after that I'm going to tell the rows to push to store the header. Okay, and after that I'm going to actually just read the current row and transform it to a string. So I'm defining a string array, okay, and oops, data set. All right, yeah, okay. So I'm defining a current row that is an array of strings, and it is empty at the start. For every part of that row, the actual row is data set I. Every part of that row has the properties that we already know. You remember, it's an array of person data, and person data have properties, and those properties are the ID, the first name, etc. Okay, so I'm pushing the components into the array of string. And of course, I'm not forgetting that the age is actually a string. I'm inserting that as a string because otherwise you will receive an error. And then I'm storing into the rows the current row. Okay. So after that, I'm going to try, and as usual, console error. What I'm going to try to do is actually calling the function that I have, the write CSV function from the module. So write CSV if handler and rows. Okay, so I guess that's it. Okay, yeah, we can now finally execute the program and see what will happen. So actually it's here, I think. No. So let me check clear. So here we can do this Deno run allow read allow write allow allow network main ts, and let's see. Okay, yeah, I have the gender type already in the database, so I'm going to do something. I'm going to connect to the database and I'm going to delete that. So add connection, it's a Postgres, connection name local Postgres. Okay, connect using blah 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 localhost database tutorials db. Username is what? Tester, and save connection. Okay, testing 1 2 3. Okay, so now I am inside the database. I can see the tables there. I have the persons table there already, but that's from previous session. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop type gend yeah, drop table persons. I think that's it. Oops, what? Cannot drop because other objects don't depend on. Ah, yeah, sure. It's you need to drop the table first. Okay. So let me close this. Yeah, here you go. so that the gender type is dropped and the table is dropped. Now I can execute the application again. Sorry. So let's try this again. I'm going to show the files here just in case. So clear. Okay, so it finished. Now you can see that I have now an output file that contains all the mails, which I don't know, 31 instances, 31 rows, excluding of course the headers. And these are the guys you see, they are all younger than 18 or older than 65. So you see, we can do something similar. Let's go again and drop the table data. Okay, and let's go back and try this. Where is the main? Okay, so I'm going to do something else. So I'm going to ask the database for all, get me everybody where the gender is female and they are aged between 20 and 50. So we are going to, you see the output is here. So now we are going to check for the females. Again, setting up the DB, inserting the data into the DB, querying the data from the DB, and saving. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I've saved into the same file, which is not exactly what I wanted to do. So let me delete this. Let me delete this and let me say females here. Okay, right. So again, I go back and I drop the table and the gender, so I don't have data. All right. So we are selecting the females and we are saving to the females file. Okay. Again, setting up the DB, inserting the data, querying the data, and saving to a females file. All right. So check in. Now we have all the females from the data. Okay, if you compare that, this is the original one. Okay, so we have males, females, ages 31, 94, 29, 96, all kinds of data. Okay, female with 2 years, for example, female 67 years. That should not be present in the file here. So you see that we have females age from what did we say, 20 to 50. Okay, so we have now 28, 41, less than 50. Well, we have 150. Okay, so here you can see you can do a lot of this, these operations. You can have a complete folder of CSV files and you want to provide transformations of one form to another form. You can do this programmatically using Deno. It's very simple, it's very powerful, it's performant, so it's not slow, and it's fun. Okay, that concludes the tutorial for this time. If you liked the video, please like, subscribe, and I hope to see you next time.